All right, welcome to the Mixed Faith Marriage Mastermind, where I'm joined by two of my colleagues and compatriots, Suzette Halterman and Chris Rich. Today, we're going to be talking about respect. We have done a series of these recordings, podcasts, however you find them, videos, and go and listen to the other ones. We are developing what I would consider to be a rich library, free resources for you. So go and listen to the other ones where we give more fulsome introductory. But for today, I'm going to give a quick introductory on the three of us. Myself, I'm Brooke Booth. I am a certified life coach. I help Mormons in mixed faith marriage find love, find stability, navigate through a faith transition, and navigate through a mixed faith marriage. Suzette Halterman is a therapist / coach. She's therapist trained and she works as a coach. She specializes in working with couples in difficult relationships and working through mixed faith marriages as well. And then Chris Rich, another life coach as well. All three are certified. She specializes in helping you work through your mixed faith marriage, especially from the believing perspective. We all come from different perspectives. Chris Rich is the believer. We're using these labels loosely. Please understand this is to communicate as clearly as we can. I am post-Mormon, and Suzette attends, but isn't maybe that strict Orthodox believer that we tend to associate with active members of the church. Okay, with that said, we're going to dive right into the topic of respect so we can use our time here talking about the juicy stuff and talking about the things that are helpful to you. We're going to have a bit of a roundtable discussion on respect and how it applies to those of us in a mixed faith marriage, things we've seen with our clients, things we've experienced personally. So let's just start talking about how do you even define respect? I wanted to start here because I find that a lot of my clients have very diverse definitions. My husband and I have very diverse definitions. And a lot of times we'll be talking about respect, but we're not talking about the same thing. So I thought this would be a great place to start. Why don't one of you tell us like how you define respect and deal with just even the issue of defining something like respect?
I'm happy to share. And I have to say, as I've been preparing for this, I cannot get Aretha Franklin out of my head. I've got R-E-S-P-E-C-T. So I know how to spell respect. Let's talk about defining it. I just went to Google, and a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievement. That was one definition, but it was interesting to see there's a lot of different ones. But I think kind of for me, I think about respect is accepting somebody for who they are, even when they're different from you or you don't agree with them. I think that's kind of, I think that's how I would define it.
Suzette, what about you?
I would just add, to me, it's just like the element of recognizing the humanity of another person. And as a human being, they deserve dignity. They have worth just because they exist as a human being. So to me, it's just about honoring the worth of another human being always through your words and your actions. They're another valid human being. To me, it's about, yeah, honoring the validity and the worth of another human being always.
So I'll add mine, and mine's, I like to define some other words so we know what we're not defining or how it can often be, I don't want to say misconstrued because you get to choose your own definition, but sometimes how we can fall into the trap of using the same word but actually using different definitions. So I like to use the idea of respect. It's actually very similar to Suzette's, where we're both deserving of like equal treatment. We're both deserving of having our viewpoints and our opinions honored equally. So there's an element of equality. So then you kind of have to define equality to even understand the definition of respect. I see other words thrown around here that I think people sometimes conflate or use as their definition of respect. One is deference. For me, deference means that others' opinions or ideas get like extra weight in my calculation because they've earned that, maybe through trust building, maybe through you know, that they have proven to be somebody that, you know, has good ideas that I want to give weight to. And I like to think of deference and respect as different, because everybody's worthy of respect, but not everybody in my life is worthy of my deference. And the other thing I think sometimes gets tied into respect is entitlement. Entitlement is, you know, like, I should have it just because, you know, you know, because I'm your husband or because I'm your wife, I should fill in the blank. And I think sometimes entitlement, when we feel entitled and we don't get something, we sometimes call that as disrespectful. But I think it's helpful for me to parse these out so I understand what I mean when I say respect. What does my client mean when they say respect? Because if I like look at my own life, I may be treating people equally, but I'm not giving them deference. Like their opinions are valid, their position as a human in the world is valid, but their opinions don't have extra weight on my decision making because maybe they haven't earned deference. And certainly entitlement is a very rare thing in my world when people just get carte blanche entitlement. Okay. And I wanted to define that because my next question is your partner entitled to your respect? What do you guys think?
I think all humans are entitled to respect, but again, it goes back to the definition of, well, what are you defining as respect or disrespect? So, I mean, I think all humans are entitled to respect and consideration. But that doesn't mean that you just tolerate everything. That doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. That doesn't mean you just accept certain behaviors. Like there's everybody should have respect. I think everyone's entitled to respect, but how that looks, I think we don't define disrespect well and respect in our interactions. We think, oh, well, that was disrespectful just because I didn't, it was a boundary. No, boundaries can still be respect. So I think it gets really tricky, but yes, my opinion is everyone is entitled to respect as a human being. But what that looks like just might not fit your definition of what respect is, if that makes any sense.
And I think of, so I think of respect as an emotion, and our emotions come from our thoughts, how we're thinking about that other person. And I am the one that gets to feel my emotions. And to me, respect is an emotion that feels fantastic. I love that emotion. And I also want to point out that it's as an emotion, it's respect is something that it might not be that I feel it 100% of the time. It's going to be dependent on how I'm thinking about that person. So there are a lot of things that there are a lot of times where I feel a lot of respect toward my husband. And I love that. I love that feeling. There are also times where I'm like, that was a dumb idea. Or, recognizing that it's not something that if I'm noticing like, well, if you're thinking of it as I'm not really feeling respect right now, I'm going to offer that it's okay that we don't feel that 100% of the time, because depending on what is going on, you may feel it or you might not. And I know there are times where turning the tables, there are some times where I show up in a way where I'm not my best self. And that I've mentioned this before, I'm a 50-50 human. Sometimes I'm a rock star, sometimes I'm a hot mess. And I think a big part of this too is respecting ourselves and recognizing, am I showing up as a person that I respect? I think that's a really important question to ask.
Yeah. I agree with both of what you're saying. All people, all humans are valuable and should be respected in terms of, their opinions are equally important, their experiences are equally important, their viewpoints are equally important. And I love to use that as the hallmark of like my relationships. Like I have a 10-year-old son and I just absolutely love telling him, like, I love you. Do you know why I love you? And he'll be like, why? And I'll be like, for no reason at all. Like just because you breathe. And it's a really fun conversation we have together. But to me, that like is an example of like this like universal respect. And then when I add a qualification, I love the comments you were making about like how we define disrespect. And I think we should dive into that, Suzette. But I think there needs to be qualifications for like, I would qualify it like deference. You get my respect, but not everybody gets my deference. You certainly have my respect, but not everybody has my, entitlement to my time or my energy or, whatever that may look like. And we should talk about that more, because the next question is, if you feel disrespected in your marriage, like, how do you deal with that? What's your approach? Might be helpful to like elaborate a little bit more on what disrespect means or looks like as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, to me, disrespect is putting yourself in a position above someone else and talking down to them. So that's like abuse. Boundary violations is also disrespect. So telling people what they should think, feel, or do, that is that's crossing a boundary, and that's disrespectful. You're putting yourself above them, like I'm entitled to cross that boundary of what is yours and what is mine and tell you what to do, think, or feel. Verbal abuse, using belittling language, harsh language, yelling, screaming. I think any of that is putting yourself above another person and talking down to them in some way, some sort of degrading, boundary violating way. And to me, that is what disrespect is. So that's how I like to look at it.
So then how do you deal with that? Like, what's your approach if you see that happening in a relationship, Suzette? And then we'll hear from Chris.
So boundaries always, like you don't have to meet disrespect with more disrespect. Like if someone's talking down to you with contempt, sarcasm, belittling, whatever, you don't have to reciprocate that, but you also don't have to tolerate that. You can meet that with respect, like, hey, when you talk to me that way, we can't have a productive conversation. I'm going to leave the room, and we can try again later. Like if you can use more respectful language, or, I don't tolerate that kind of language, so I'm not going to engage in conversation with you, and walk away. But you're doing that from a place of like, I get it. Like, we all kind of go up. We all kind of can do that. We all get activated. We all get reactive. I get that, but I'm not going to tolerate it. So you deal with it with boundaries, putting limits of, hey, this is what I will and won't tolerate, walking away, whatever, but you don't engage. You don't go belittling back. You don't become verbally abusive. You don't cross boundaries in return. Just because someone else has lost control of their best selves doesn't mean you're entitled to do the same.
And I think that's when we see cycles in relationships, is when we sort of both fall into that. But
so easy. Like to me, that's like relational integrity is what Terry Real calls it. Like when your spouse loses it and are being like, whatever, childish, whatever, that you can hold on to the better version of yourself and not give in and give yourself, you don't give yourself permission to act in the same way. Like if they're being rude, it doesn't give me permission to be rude. Like I'm going to hold on to my best self, right? Like that's the dream. Not that I do that all the time, that's for sure.
yeah, that's the dream. And I think it's also important to qualify ideal dream is not always real and practical. But Chris, what are your thoughts?
And I was just adding to what Suzette was saying. One of my favorite thoughts or things that I say is, I love you and I love me. So I'm not okay with you talking to me like that. That's more that I don't think I use that on my husband, on my kids. That's definitely one where it's like, yeah, that's not okay for you to say that. So I kind of so I agree with everything that Suzette was saying. And I have a couple other things that I think so often our spouses, the people around us, they do something or say something that's very easy to think the thought, they don't respect me. And I think it's good. That's where we've talked before about the model that we use with our clients. And I just want to share what that model kind of looks like. So let's say that I'm just going to use the example that your husband or your partner did not take the garbage out. And so you see that the garbage is still sitting there, and you might have this thought, they don't respect me. And I know for me, if I'm thinking a thought like that, I am probably going to be hurt or angry. And if anger is the fuel for my actions that I show up with, I am probably going to isolate myself. I'm probably not going to say anything about it. I am going to go be judgy. I'm probably going to call a girlfriend and say, guess what? My husband doesn't respect me. He didn't take the garbage out. And I'm going to go and make it all dramatic. I'm probably not going to think very kind thoughts about him. I don't speak up for myself. And then what I end up creating for myself is that I don't respect him back. And so I kind of like to look at it as, so the garbage is sitting there. Did he really walk past it and say, you know what? I just don't respect Chris. I'm not taking the garbage out. Or was it he forgot about it? So I think it's important that, I mean, there are the times that Suzette was talking about, and definitely we need to have those clear boundaries and to stand up for ourselves. And so often we take a circumstance and we add a lot of meaning and make it very dramatic when it probably had nothing to do with respect at all. So just another viewpoint.
That's such a good point. You know what I like to do is it builds on both of what you've said here. Is it can be really helpful to understand, like, if I'm feeling disrespected, to like ask myself, like, what do I need here? You know, what am I meaning? What do I mean when I say I feel disrespected? Am I wanting deference? Am I wanting to be heard? Am I wanting my opinion to be equal with theirs? You know, am I wanting them to put me first? Am I needing to share my wants and my needs? Like, what is it? Like, it's sort of like I need something, something's happening, and a chance for me to be like, okay, what's needed here? If I'm not feeling respected, like, what's actually going on inside of me? And it's helpful to get, I want to hear it, but I'll just make one little comment. It's helpful to get really curious. Like, I tend to get hurt. Like Chris mentioned in her model, I tend to get hurt when I tell myself like I don't feel respected. It can be really helpful to get curious and start asking questions of like, what do you really want here? What do you really need here? What's really going on here? Suzette, what do you want to say?
No, I just building on that. I think it's so easy. I think we conflate being respected with you doing what I want or you valuing what I value.
Mhm.
And that is not the same as respect. So really being able to tease that out, like, oh, like you didn't go to church with me, you're being disrespectful. You didn't join us for come follow me. You're not initiating scripture, or the opposite. You're not listening to this podcast that I sent you that I want you to read. That feels disrespectful when you don't do that. No, that's just them valuing something different, them having different things that matter to them, and that has nothing to do with respect. Like, it might be, if they respond to that with harshness or belittling or sarcasm, that might be disrespect. But really, we have such an enmeshed culture, especially in marriage, like where it's like respect is the same as you doing what I want and it valuing what I value and thinking like I think. And when you don't do that, that's disrespectful. And I think we really need to tease that out, because it's not. You can value something else and still be very respectful in the relationship. It has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, I think that's what I would call like the entitlement piece of like,
Mhm.
we have to agree on this and we have to see this the same way, and you have to initiate, family homing, and you have to do these things. I think there's a flavor of entitlement in that, which I would totally agree with you is different than respect. And when we get hooked on those other ideas, it's so easy to believe I'm not respected. It's so easy to feel hurt, and it's so easy to have them meet you in that same energy, and then you just get into sort of this like, you don't respect me, finger pointing exercise.
Yeah, we go into the stories, we start spinning all the stories about what that means, like you said, Chris. Like, they don't do something, we create a meaning that was disrespectful, and then we're in our stories, and then we act from that place, and they respond with an energy, and it's, yeah, so yucky, so messy.
So let's build on this. So if your spouse says they don't feel respected, like, how do you deal with that? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because like, this is part of like recognizing the cycle, stepping out of the cycle, because I'm guessing we've all felt disrespected, and I'm guessing our spouses have all communicated one way or another that they feel disrespected. So how about when they're expressing like that they're feeling disrespected?
Can I go back to the other? Well, this works either way too. I think a tool that is really helpful, just like Suzette was saying, is when you say this or when you do that, I'm making it mean this. This is how I feel. Is that really what you mean? And so, they might be like, yes, that's exactly what I mean. Or they might be like, no, it has nothing to do with it. So I love that question. Or, just saying, this is the story I'm telling myself about this. Is that true? I think that can be super helpful on both sides. And then pivoting back to if my spouse is feeling disrespected, I think one of the big things is just getting really curious. Like, help me understand. What do you mean? What do you asking lots and lots of questions? And instead of getting defensive, I love what Byron Katie, she says, defense is the first act of war. Like, I'm not disrespecting you, then we end up showing up not respectful, but just getting really curious and like, help me understand. What do you mean? Can you give me an example of when I did that? Um, and just being open and super curious, and also apologizing and validating. I am so sorry that you feel disrespected. That was not my intent. And being empathetic, apologizing. If I did do something that is out of character to who I want to be, then owning it. And wow, I thank you for sharing that with me. That was not my intent. Those are a couple ideas.
Yeah,
You know,
that's what I was gonna say. Defensiveness, like not getting defensive and getting curious. I find in couples most of the time when they say they don't feel respected, that when they feel disrespected, if you dig deeper about what that means, like what would it me respecting you look like? Most of the time they just don't feel important, they don't feel valued, or they don't feel like they're honored, like that there's room for them in the relationship. So for example, if a spouse goes out and drinks or something in a mixed faith marriage, they say, well, I feel disrespected. If you dig down into it, they don't feel considered because maybe the spouse did it without talking to them. They don't feel like they're fearful. They don't feel like the spouse cares about how that impacts them. So they don't feel considered. And those are all very different things, I think. So getting really specific in your language, like maybe you don't feel considered, maybe you don't feel important enough, like me. And then what can we do about that to fix those things? What conversations do we need to have so that we can be on the same page about what you're doing and what I need in this moment and what you need, and how can we create a win-win solution? Like I think that's more helpful than just saying, oh, I feel disrespected. Like, or they feel disrespected. Get curious, dig deeper into more specifics, so that there's some actions you can do to change things.
yeah, I love what you're saying so much, because I think there is often a first response of defensiveness. The first response of like trying to talk them out of what they're experiencing, trying to talk them out of what they're feeling, and trying to convince them that like you didn't do anything wrong. And it does come across as defensive, and it can be one of those things that triggers those cycles you have in relationships where people are just defending and attacking and defending and attacking, or criticizing and defending. And this ability that we keep talking about of being able to like put a pause on the defensiveness and lean into curiosity and find out, like, okay, you're saying you feel disrespected, but like you were saying, are you concerned about something? Are you feeling undermined? Like, what actually is going on here? I want to highlight that this is not an easy skill. When we're triggered and feeling defensive, like we want to start packing sandbags and like building walls. I know I for sure do. And to be able to like emotionally process that and take a breath and be able to lean into curiosity. This is the goal. And I just like, if you're listening to this and you're like, how do I do this? Like, practice. Like the first time you're going to be defensive all the way through the conversation. And then maybe the next conversation, you can stop being defensive 75%. And then maybe the next time you're going to knock it off at like the 65%. Like, this is something I don't want you to feel perfectionistic over, but it is a skill that can be developed, of being able to recognize and process our defensiveness and leaning into this curiosity. And it's such a great skill to have in any relationship, like in any interpersonal relationship, because respect, I think, is one of those like universal experiences, whether it's kids or coworkers or in-laws or spouses.
I
Okay.
think too, when we're when I notice myself like, okay, I'm feeling defensive right now, and thinking of that defense is the first act of war, asking myself, do I want to battle about this? And sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes this is something that is important that I really want to be heard on. And other times it's like, no, this is not a big deal. And if it is important, okay, how can I change my fuel in this conversation so it's going to be more productive? Because I think that um, that sometimes it is something really important that we do want to keep pursuing.
Mhm. So let's talk about this in the context of like mixed faith marriages for a minute, because I've heard so many of my clients say that they don't or can't respect their spouse's beliefs. You know, how can I respect somebody who fill in the blank believes this about the church or doesn't believe this about the church? Like, it can cut either ways. You know, how can you respect a person and not their beliefs? How to reconcile that? Some people in turn feel if their beliefs aren't respected, that they're not respected. How to reconcile this idea of beliefs and individuals and respect? What are your thoughts on this one?
I'll go. I love this question because I also hear this a lot and see this a lot with couples. How can you respect someone if you don't respect their beliefs? How can you, to me, it's you look for the human, like as humans, there's only so many emotions we experience, and we all have just a limited number of responses to those. So, all humans, we experience uncertainty and anxiety. We respond to that often through control. We respond to that through, like trying to control others, trying to control our environment, trying to control ourselves. So I look for, if I'm dealing with somebody who has a belief system very different than me, that I'm like, I don't really respect the beliefs, that to me they're harming or whatever. I look for the core human condition, like anxiety, like, yeah, I get it. Like there's uncertainty there. They're responding to uncertainty by trying to, their belief system is about controlling this and this. Well, I do that all the time. Like I control my kids. Like I'm a major control freak with my kids. That's how I respond to uncertainty. So I do that same thing in other areas, even though I may not do it in my belief system. So I try to find that like kernel of humanness, that I am the same as them. Because often, this is the work of John DeMartini, he says that the thing that we're judging in others is often something we're trying to disown about ourselves. So what we're judging, like, oh, that this belief system, it's oppressing people and it's harming people. Where do I do that in other ways? Like, where have I done that? Because I can and own up to that. Like, I'm a human. I do these things. Like, I go one up. I put people below me. That is part of human nature. So I think that's an important part. Like, I can respect the humanness. I can see the kernel of humanity and know that, like, yeah, like I do that same thing in other circumstances. So I get it. So I can still respect you as a person. I'm thinking of like Trump. Like, I do not like Trump. I do not support him. I do not respect who he is, like his actions. I don't respect his actions. But I have family members, I have people who would vote for Trump in a second. I can respect them because I can say like I get it. I get being able to overlook certain things because something is really important to you and you're prioritizing that. Like, I overlook stuff all the time. I choose things that will make my life better without regard to other people's lives. Like, I do that. Like, I'm guilty. So I can respect their humanness and their responses, and just respect them for how they're responding as a human to this situation. Even though it might not be how I would respond, but I respond similarly in other situations. So who am I to judge, right? To me, that is like respect. That was a long answer. Hope that made sense.
Well, I think that's an important answer. I really do. Chris, I love to hear your responses. What do you got to say?
Yeah, I love Suzette. I love that. And yeah, just that kernel of truth that that person has. Also, I think it's so important to realize you don't have to agree with someone to respect them. I think we have this idea that I think one of the trickiest things in mixed faith marriages is this idea that we need to be on the same page. We need to have the same ideas, the same beliefs, and then I will respect you. And if we don't, then it's not going to work. And I think that's something that I used to really struggle with. And now recognizing like we have such different beliefs on so many different things. And I respect my husband even more because he allows me to be me. And there's so many things that we see completely different. And I think part of respect is when we don't agree, what does that look like? And the beauty of that, of how there can be so much respect when we have different opinions, just like, you know what, this is my opinion, that's your opinion, and I completely love you and respect you. And that's, I, I think that's so important. And I want to point out for my believing friends that the 11th article of faith, we claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience and allow all men the same privilege. Let them worship how, where, or what they may. And I think that is easy to do when it's not your spouse or your child. Like, oh yeah, I believe this. This is a tenet of my faith if it's not directly affecting me. But I want to point out that something that is very important to us is letting people be them and having their beliefs, and then we can show up in a kind and respectful way and live that 11th article of faith.
Yeah, I sometimes quote that article of faith.
It's your favorite one?
It's come up in sessions. I think this idea of being able to separate out like ideas from people is important. Like, I respect you as a valuable, worthy human, but I don't agree with your ideas or beliefs. I respect your choice to make this decision for yourself. I respect that you're human and you deserve good things and you can have your own ideas. And I also respect that I can disagree with those ideas. Like, being able to hold this like duality of sorts, I think is a really important skill of recognizing that like beliefs and your ideologies don't equate to your value and your worth. Those are separate things. And I can respect your value and your worth and your ability to make your own ideas and come to your own conclusions 110%. I can also respect that for myself. So this is something I hear Chris say a lot of like, okay, how is that like for them? But then how is that for you? Like making sure there's that equal looking at the relationship to make sure both people are getting an equal shake. And I think respect is one of those places where you can really practice that. I value your ability to make this decision and come to your own conclusions, and I value my ability to come to these conclusions and make these decisions for myself. The other thing I'll say about this is for some people, when their spouse has a different belief system and doesn't quote unquote respect their beliefs, that is something that's not tenable. And that's part of respecting their decisions and their belief systems. That might be part of their belief system and a decision they come to, that I don't want to be in a mixed faith marriage, or I don't want to be married to somebody who can't respect my beliefs the way I want them to be respected. That can be really hard. I think sometimes in this mixed faith marriage world, we poo-poo that a little bit as like a lesser way of being in a marriage and come to the moral high ground where there's room for everybody. And I like that idea of being able to make room for everybody, but I also highly respect that for some people, that's not how they want to be in a relationship. And they don't want to be in that kind of marriage. And it's hard and it's not easy, but I think that's part and parcel to this respect. Is like for some people, that's not like the way you and the three of us deal with it isn't going to work for them. isn't going to be something that they can do. Tough, but true. I have to make one more comment about Trump because I really liked your analogy. When he was president, my kids would want to dehumanize him. And I do not agree with his politics, but I was so careful to say, like, oh no, he's still a human and we're not going to engage in dehumanizing tactics regardless. Like, I don't care if they're Nazis. I don't care like what their political affiliation are. They are humans. And like that doesn't give us, I used to like had a conversation with my kids, like just because there's a Nazi doesn't mean we can break their arm. Like that's not, and I like to have these conversations with kids too, of like being able to teach this idea of respect in the sense that like humans are inherently worthy and valuable, and their ideology is separate from that. There's my thought.
And they're just shaped. They're shaped by so many factors and their own trauma and their own culture and their own family history, just like I am shaped. So to judge like, oh, the way you were shaped was horrible, you know, is less than me. We were just both shaped by the factors around us. So I can have like empathy for you as a human. I think empathy is part of respect. Like I can have empathy for the fact that you were shaped by a lot of things. I may not agree with what you do, I may not agree with your beliefs, but I can still have respect for you as a fellow human that was molded and shaped in a lot of ways.
And once again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it just, yeah, you don't need to agree with someone, and you can, it feels good to love someone and to respect them. It doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. You might even not even be hanging out with the person, but you can still, you're the one that feels your emotions. And do you really want to hang on to that hatred and that anger? And because that doesn't feel good.
Okay, let's talk about another practical situation. This is something I've seen like enough times that I thought we should talk about it. So here's the situation. I call it like the interrupter. So one partner in course of conversation interrupts. By the way, I'm an interrupter. Like this is so me. Like interrupts. And that's labeled as disrespectful by their partner. However, from their point of view, like interruption is how they've always communicated with their intimates. That's like how their family, maybe of origin, functions or things like that. It's for some people, it's a way they interact with equals. And so it's a sign of intimacy and it's a sign of equality. For some people, interrupting is a sign of disrespect and a sign where you're not equals. And it can be, I've seen, like I've had coaching calls with couples specifically over this topic. And it's always so interesting, like how to reconcile these different standards of respect, like as it comes to interrupting in conversations. And now, mind you, this can be so many things. Like we'll talk about it in interrupting in conversations, but this can apply to anything that you would have in a mixed faith marriage, you know, initiating family homemaking, alcohol, tank tops, like all of this. But I'm curious to hear your perspective on this particular issue.
I think it again comes down to defining together, like what does respect mean to you? It's like using the word connection, like that is so broad and can mean like we're talking about physical connection, emotional connection, intellectual connection, but it's the same. Like if interrupting feels disrespectful, well, what feels respectful to you? What doesn't? Let me just be curious about how you define it, even though it might be different than I define it, and let's find some common language around this or some common things that so let's make some agreements about what's okay and what's not okay. Like if it feels disrespectful to you, okay, then maybe we need to not be doing that, even if I don't agree, right? It's always finding a middle ground, talking about things, trying to find something that works for the both of you. I think that's the ultimate goal. Find something that works for the both of you. Yeah.
What about you, Chris?
I think that when we first got married, I remember we were like out in public and I was on one, I think at a grocery store or something. I was on one aisle, my husband was on a different one, and he whistled, you know, just like a little, and I was appalled. I was just like, I went up to him, I'm like, I am not a dog. I do not like that. Do not ever whistle at me again. And then after I realized that is like this kind of this sweet thing that they did in their family, that they had like a special rich family call and they would do this whistle. And then after a while, I mean, it took me a long time to realize this, but I'm like, that's kind of cute. They're not doing it like they would. I had to understand like what was the intent, what was really going on here. And also, I think it is important to voice, like, hey, I don't like being that. I don't like it when you do that. We can make the request and also just kind of try to understand what is the why are they doing that? And going back to thinking that is so disrespectful. Maybe he was thinking like, I'm just trying to find my wife, and this is something that we did in our family. So, what are we making it mean? And nothing wrong with making requests, but also just trying to understand from their point of view.
This is such a great point because this is something I've seen in my own marriage, and I see with like I was just coaching somebody and he was Jewish and she was Japanese. Let me tell you, cultural differences right there. Right. But I see this in my own marriage, is this idea that some things we interpret as disrespectful are like cultural differences. Like Chris and her husband, different family cultures. One where whistling was a sign of communication and endearment and intimacy, and the other one where it was like how you treat dogs. So different. And I think so much of this conversation to be had when a couple comes together that we don't have a lot of the times is like, how are we going to do it? How are we going to like communicate? How are we going to show respect? How are we not going to show disrespect? Like, how are we going to do it? I think in part because the LDS like message and culture is so much about erasing, like sort of like it's an assimilation. And I don't mean this with any judgment. This is just what it is. That I certainly, when I went into my marriage, just assumed my husband, like his family did things the same way my family did, like from a cultural perspective, because that's like, when different cultures come into the church, they all wear white shirts and ties. Like there's an assimilation process, both in the United States and in the church. So that was just like what I assumed, that like your family's pretty much the same way my family, and the way you talk and think about respect is pretty much the same way I talk and think about respect. Not the case. Not the case. And I think when we go in with these false assumptions, it prohibits us from having these conversations that Suzette is talking about as so important. And sometimes it'll be like 10 years in before you're like, we need to figure this out. But then habits and like things have been developed that it's a little bit more work to do this. And so I think sometimes the respect conversation needs to be looked at through like an anthropological lens. And looking at as like, these are different cultures and one isn't right or wrong, but how are we going to do it? And that can be really hard for one individual in the couple to not hold maybe their family of origin up as the right way and see the other methodologies or culture as lesser than, which is all part of what we're talking about with respect. Exactly.
That's going into that one-up position of the way I do things is better instead of I just do things different. I'm not better or worse than anyone else.
It's so true. And that's why I wanted to highlight this, because sometimes when we say things like that's disrespectful, what we're saying is ultimately I'm judging the way you're showing up here culturally as less than the way I show up here culturally. And that's fascinating, because sometimes when something's labeled as disrespectful, ultimately the person putting the label is exercising a form of disrespect. And it can take some work to start to understand and identify what's actually going on in these situations.
A lot of judgment is what's going on.
Yeah, big old judge fest.
Place of superiority is off. I'm superior and I'm judging you. Guilty. I'm laughing because let me just tell you. So part of the reason I go to church, like I go to support my husband, it's not my belief system, but while I'm there, I choose to practice these skills of really noticing all the times, like during sacrament meeting, that I go in this one-up position and I'm judging and I'm feeling superior because I know all these, all the things that I do, and I have to bring myself down and I have to separate people's belief systems and from who they are. And it's really beautiful for me. Like I need it because I suck at this often. Like I'm very judgmental. I can be very I can have a hard time separating people from their beliefs. But it's really beautiful for me. Like I've had experiences where I just feel like take men who believe that women shouldn't have the priesthood. Like, whoa, I disagree with that. Don't believe that. But at the same time, like, I feel like, oh, these men are so good. Like Mormonism creates such good men. And I have so much respect. So in those moments, I can really like tease out my belief system from the people. And that's what I'm doing during church on Sundays over and over. And it's practice. Like, so all of this that we're talking about, judging and curiosity and separating people from their belief systems, it's like a practice. It's like a muscle and a skill. I have in no way mastered this skill, but I do practice it, and it I feel like it makes me a better human being in my relationships when I'm trying to practice this. So just that little personal note there.
Do you have any last thoughts or things you'd like to add, Chris? And then I'll just add my last thoughts.
Just going off of what Suzette was thinking, and I'm an active believing member. I want to be at church. I love being there. And I think we are constantly in situations where I find myself like, she is so judgmental. I can't believe she just said that. And then I'm like, ooh, this is so interesting. I'm judging her for being judgmental. We are doing the exact same things. And I being able to step back and just watch like, oh, yep, I'm doing it too. Finding, like Suzette was talking about earlier, that kernel of how are we doing the exact same thing? Also, so we're all figuring this out. And I think this is a great, if you're experiencing this in your relationship, this is a great thing to come and talk to a coach or a therapist or a counselor, because this stuff takes practice. It takes work. It's not things that we may not have developed these skills yet. So this is an important thing that all of us are figuring out, and a coach can be a great tool to help you to practice.
Thing I'll wrap up with is, like, as we were talking about this, I started to realize more and more that when we think the issue is respect in our relationship, it might not be. Like this is a time to really dig in and look around. You may think the issue is a problem with respect, and I would be very curious, like based on what we're talking about, maybe it's equality, maybe it's judgment, maybe there's something else going on here that's not being addressed or not being taken care of here. Like, yes, it might be respect, but like this is such a great opportunity to get really curious about your own relationship. How are you defining respect? How is your spouse defining respect? When you feel disrespected, why? Like what is it you're needing and wanting in that situation? When your spouse feels disrespected, what is it that they're needing and wanting? When you label something as disrespectful, like, is it? Like, what's really going on there? Is it a cultural difference? Is it you putting yourself above somebody else? I mean, there's so many interesting things to consider that we've talked about here. And I'm personally going to go and do some of my own introspection on all of this. Okay, that's what we've got for you today. We're going to meet again next month with another great topic for you as we talk about all things that impact a mixed faith marriage. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.